Welcome, everyone, to Rutgers at the Voice of College Football. I'm Adam Lamparello, New Jersey native and Rutgers Scarlet Knights fan, and admittedly a USC fan. The Rutgers Scarlet Knights are off to a 4-1 start, and today we are going to ask the question, is Rutgers a contender in the Big Ten? This is our first episode, one of many more that will begin tonight, but weekly will be on Monday at 7 p.m. each week. So is Rutgers a contender in the Big Ten? Well, we're going to talk about a few issues to answer that question. First, we're going to talk about how Rutgers has done so far, namely including the Nebraska loss. Second, we're going to talk about the outlook for Rutgers for the remainder of the season with their schedule. Third, we're going to talk about recruiting. And fourth, we're going to talk about college football games generally and the status of the Big Ten. So we also have in the chat, we have a link to, if you want to call in, the link is there. We'd be happy to take your calls. And if you like the show, please hit the like and subscribe button. So first issue, Rutgers. So they've started out at 4-1, but on Saturday suffered their first loss in Lincoln, Nebraska to the Cornhuskers. A heartbreaking loss for the Scarlet Knights, as Greg Schiano made adamantly clear in his post-game press conference. So, why did Nebraska defeat Rutgers? Well, let me start off by saying Rutgers should have absolutely won this game, but they made critical mistakes that led to a Cornhuskers victory. Let's start off with the two turnovers by quarterback Ethan Kalimakis. Two turnovers, two interceptions that absolutely killed drives. And they were two bad interceptions. Now, Ethan is a good quarterback, no question. So I'm not going to dispute that. But they were bad interceptions that killed the momentum that Rutgers had. Second, Kaliakamanis was 15 of 37 for a 41% completion rate for only 186 yards with one TD and two interceptions. And I got to tell you, when you're going on the road, you can't lose the turnover margin. Those two interceptions were killers for Rutgers. Star running back Kyle Monangai, 19 carries for 78 yards and a 4.1 yards per carry average. The problem, though, is that he should have had a touchdown, and the referees ruled that he was not across the goal line. He had a good performance, but not a great performance. Next, fourth down efficiency. Rutgers, 2 of 6, 33%. Nebraska, 3 of 3 on fourth down. Now, the next issue is a real problem. We have a Rutgers blocked punt. Rutgers blocks the punt and has it on the 3-yard line, first and goal. And they don't score. 4 straight downs. They come away with 0 points. And that was, in many ways, the difference in the game. When you have the ball on the 3-yard line, you've got to get points. I don't care if it's just 3 points, but you've got to come away with points, and Rutgers didn't do that. Star wide receiver Ben Black. He had 3 receptions for 54 yards, but he should have had 4 receptions. He missed a wide open touchdown pass that Kaliakamanis threw to him with no defender in sight, and he just dropped it. Again, these little things add up. When you take them into account in their totality, it spells a loss. Rutgers also had a missed field goal. So when you look at the missed field goal, that's 3 points. When you fail to get in from the 3-yard line, that's 7 points. You just gave away 10 points, and that would have been the difference in the game and a victory for Rutgers. Not only did they give away 10 points, though, they gave away 13 because Rutgers tried a fake field goal that went nowhere, that they should have never done. When you're on the road, like I said, you got to win a turnover battle, and you got to take the points when they are there. Rutgers only averaged 3.8 yards per play, only 78 rushing yards, only 186 passing yards for 264 total yards. That's not good enough on the road against a team like Nebraska. They also gave up a touchdown with 1 minute and 48 seconds left in the first half, and their offensive line was not good, and Callie Kamanis was under duress all day. As far as the receivers go, Ben Black, 2 receptions for 54 yards, but should have had that touchdown. So when we look at this broadly, missed touchdown because he dropped the pass, didn't get in from the 3-yard line, missed a field goal, and the fake field goal didn't work. So they could have had a significant number of points that they left on the field that would have led to a victory. KJ Duff, 3 receptions for 43 yards. Demir Miller, 2 receptions for 35 yards. But once again, on the road, that's not good enough. You have not a single receiver with more than 3 receptions and 1 with a drop pass. When you combine that with the missed field goal, the fake field goal, can't get in from the 3 on first down, you're not going to win the game. On the positive side, Rutgers showed that they do have a defense. They have an old school defense under head coach Greg Schiano, and they are tough to score on. That's why they're 4-1. That's why they beat Virginia Tech 26-23. That's why they beat Washington 21-18 in Piscataway. And Washington the next week defeats Michigan. So Rutgers is in the hunt, but are they contenders in the Big Ten? Well, possibly. And we're going to look into more information to discover that. Now, on the defensive side, Flip Dixon, great interception, 5 tackles. Tareem Powell, excellent linebacker, 5 tackles. So there were some good things to take away from this game, but when you look at the little things, every little thing cumulatively leads up to a loss. When you go on the road, you cannot have 2 turnovers, especially 2 drive-killing interceptions. You have to be able to drive 9 feet on first and goal from the 3. You have to make your field goals. You have to catch your touchdown pass. Okay? And when you combine these all, it led to a disappointing 14-3 loss. But Rutgers still is 4-1 in a Big Ten that is very competitive. And if Rutgers is going to compete for the Big Ten, though, they're going to have to win some difficult games coming up. And that leads us to the second topic, which is the outlook for Rutgers this season and going forward. So before we talk about that, we have to kind of put it into context. And that starts with head coach Greg Schiano. So this is Schiano's second stint at Rutgers. His first stint, quite successful. His second stint, well, that remains to be seen. Rutgers historically, of course, 672 wins, 696 losses. Traditionally not a contender in the Big Ten, often in last place. But let's go back and look at Greg Schiano's tenure at Rutgers, his first tenure from 2001 to 2011. In 2001, he was, we actually have our first caller here at Rutgers at the Voice of College Football. So before we get to that, I'd like to welcome our first caller. This is Ryan. Ryan, thanks so much for being here on the show. Where are you from and what's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm from South Georgia, and I just happened upon the channel, and I was wondering, why exactly are you starting a Rutgers channel? Why not, actual football teams and not teams that only beat weaker opponents?
Okay. Now I know how Mark Rogers feels. Okay, so why Rutgers? Well, because Rutgers is 4-1. Rutgers defeated a Washington Huskies team that defeated Michigan. Rutgers defeated Virginia Tech on the road. And I would also suggest that this reflects a trend going upwards because in 2023 in the Pinstripe Bowl, they beat the Miami Hurricanes 31-24. And they've got a head coach, Greg Schiano, who's had a who's had a significant amount of success at Rutgers. So that would explain the why about Rutgers. But you mentioned you were from South Georgia. So my
Yes.
question for you is, are you a Rutgers fan, or dare I say, are you a fan of a team in Georgia?
Yeah, I'm a fan of a team in Georgia. Back-to-back national champions.
You'd be referring to the Georgia Bulldogs, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so let's talk about that Alabama game.
Let's.
Four turnovers against Alabama, all
Yes.
by Carson Beck. 3 interceptions, 1 fumble, and down 28-0 after the first quarter. And then when they have the ball on the 20-yard line with about 20 seconds left, he throws his final interception. And Georgia's defense looked way on their heels in the first half. So you asked me why a Rutgers channel, why a Georgia channel?
Well, unlike Rutgers, Georgia has quality wins against teams like Clemson, teams like Auburn, who, albeit not super competitive, much more competitive than Rutgers in their respective conference. Teams like Kentucky, who just took down a top 10 team in Ole Miss. Rutgers, 2 out of their 4 wins happen to be Akron and Howard, an FCS school, who have not been competitive in the FCS in I don't know how long.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned the Alabama game, and it's unfortunate. The first half did not go the way we wanted it to, but you look at the second half, defense allowed 11 points. Carson Beck threw 2 touchdowns, 3 actually, I think. So it wasn't a pretty loss, but made it interesting there at the end.
All right, so let me ask you this then. Let's assume Rutgers goes to Piscataway, New Jersey, and on the road, Georgia goes to Piscataway, and they play Rutgers at Rutgers Stadium. You think it would be competitive?
No.
You don't think it would be competitive? Okay. Well, you mentioned quality wins, so I think a victory on the road at Virginia Tech, a victory over the Washington Huskies, who just defeated Michigan. Admittedly, Michigan has a quarterback problem, but Michigan is still a quality team. Now we look at Georgia. Georgia won at Kentucky in Lexington, 14-13. They were up 14-3 at the half against Auburn, and they lost to Alabama. So what would you say is a quality win? You're saying the Clemson victory is a quality win?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Clemson win is a very high-quality win. I think the Kentucky win, it will end up turning out to be a fairly impressive win, given the way they've looked in recent weeks, taking down Ole Miss in Oxford.
I think you have a point there. I do. I think that they really neutralized Ole Miss's offense, and there was no answer that Lane Kiffin had. So what are your thoughts on Carson Beck? Is he a Heisman contender? What went wrong for him in the first half?
I don't know how much of it is Carson Beck and how much of it is play calling. He looked rattled. I think this was one of his first tests against a high-quality team on the road. He looked uneasy. He missed some reads. He overthrew some balls. He also didn't get help much by his receivers. His either his first or second interception was a route that Arian Smith, one of our receivers, completely blew. Never even turned around and looked at the ball. He had a possible touchdown drop by Arian Smith again. He tried to make a hero play at the end of the game there for that 3rd interception that I don't think was quite. You can't blame him too much for that. So.
Well, maybe Rutgers will see you in the Pinstripe Bowl again this year, but I will say this: Alabama beats you.
Playoff game.
Well, that assumes Georgia's going to make the playoffs, and Georgia's still got to go to Austin, and they've got to beat those Longhorns. But when I think about Georgia losing to Alabama, it looked like Alabama was at the top of the conference, but then Alabama loses to Vanderbilt, so it's wide open. So I think ultimately, yeah, Georgia still has a shot, but I think that coming back to your question about Rutgers, when you look at head coach Greg Schiano and you look at the fact that they did beat a decent team on the road, Virginia Tech, they did beat Washington, and they do have a very strong defense, and they have the number 22 recruiting class coming in ahead of Ole Miss and Florida. I would say that's enough of a justification for a channel. Would you agree?
I can get behind that, and do have one more question for you.
Sure, absolutely.
Do you honestly think that Rutgers has a chance of beating kind of those upper tier, Big Ten schools, like your Ohio State's, Oregon's, USC, who I believe they play soon? Some
That's
of those schools.
That's a really good question. Do I think they have a chance of beating these upper tier teams? Last year they lost to Ohio State 36-15 at home, and it was only 14-7 Ohio State at the half. They were competitive against the type of schools that you're talking about, but I will say that the loss to Nebraska 14-7 makes me less optimistic. So my answer to your question is, do I think they can beat the Ohio States? Do I think they can beat the Georgias and the Alabamas right now? No, but I think that they're pretty close. And I think that if they continue to recruit well and have Greg Schiano as the coach, they will get there in a couple of years.
Fair enough.
And as far as USC goes, for full disclosure, I'm a USC fan because I went to college at University of Southern California. Do I think they can beat USC? I absolutely think they can beat USC, and I'll tell you why. USC just lost to a very, very average Minnesota team, and USC lost to a good but not great Michigan team. So that was defeated by Washington. So my belief that USC was going to the playoff and have a 10-2, maybe 11-1 season, I no longer believe that. So I think Rutgers has a chance to beat USC. But like you said, do they have a chance to beat Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Ohio State now? I think you're right that the answer to that is probably no.
Maybe we can agree on that.
Yeah, well, you're the first caller on the first show, so you get some type of award or medal for being the first caller.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Don't believe so. I just saw the show, wanted to pop by and see what was going on.
Well, Ryan, we really appreciate you calling in. Thank you so much for your good questions, and please tune in Monday at 7 p.m. each week, and look forward to hearing from you again.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks so much. And we have another caller, which I admit I did not anticipate on the first show. We have Joe on the show. Joe, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
All right. So what's on your mind?
Well, I was listening to your discussion about the Georgia-Alabama game, and I am a Georgia fan myself.
Another Georgia fan. I have been blessed with two Georgia fans on the first show. Okay, go on.
That game was truly it was something to watch. Did you happen to watch the game?
I did watch the game. I watched it from start to finish. It was one of the greatest games I've seen probably in the last I would say it's probably the greatest game I've seen since the 2006 Rose Bowl with USC and Texas.
Gotcha.
What are your thoughts on the game?
I think Georgia didn't show up in that first half, and that's really what ended up killing us that whole game. You can't go on the road and expect to have an easy start, and we just didn't show up. Didn't show up against Kentucky, and then we walked right into Alabama thinking it would be the same or even easier, and it just didn't turn out.
Okay, well then let me ask you the same question I asked Ryan. What's your thoughts on Carson Beck?
Like he said, I do believe that's his first big test on the road against one of the best teams in the country, if not the best team, given their performance before last weekend. And I think he is a phenomenal quarterback, and he is going to do well. I don't know if he's Heisman contender this year because of the slow start, but he's definitely up there with the top quarterbacks of this year.
Yeah, one thing about Carson Beck, he did have a terrible first half, but then he torched Bama's secondary for 439 yards in the second half, and it looked like Bama had no answer for him. My only question about Beck is whether he has kind of the mindset to not get rattled under difficult circumstances. But I think ultimately Georgia did acquit itself well by coming back in the second half, and then we see Alabama losing to Vanderbilt. Any thoughts on Rutgers? Rutgers, up-and-coming program headed by Greg Schiano.
Thoughts? No, I don't have any thoughts about Rutgers. Never have, probably never will.
But I see. So, yes, these blue blood schools have no respect for Rutgers. Understood.
I don't even know where Rutgers is, to be honest with you.
Okay, Rutgers is in New Jersey. The main campus, well, they have several campuses. It's a campus in New Brunswick, and the stadium is in Piscataway, and they're headed by Greg Schiano in his second stint. But they did beat Washington, and they did beat Virginia Tech on the road, and they narrowly lost to Nebraska due to many mistakes. But I think they might be an up-and-coming team. But let me ask you this one final question. What's your prediction for Georgia this year? Playoffs and national title?
I think that's what we have to come to expect at this point, yeah. I think
we'll
compete for
I think one problem with Georgia, though, Glenn Schumann didn't have that defense ready in the first half. I don't know. What was going on there? I mean, it looked like they weren't even prepared.
Yeah, I agree. They didn't come in wanting to stop the run. They didn't want to stop the pass. It was just like they wanted to come back in the second half and ultimately couldn't do it.
Well, I'll tell you this, Ryan. Much respect for Georgia. I mean, they did win back-to-back national titles. And I will disclose I actually currently live in Georgia, which is why I'm so surprised that we got 2 Georgia calls. But what I would encourage you to do is, hey, if you have any time on Mondays at 7 p.m., tune into the Rutgers show, and you might be surprised. You might even become a fan.
Okay. I do have
Thanks
one
so much.
question.
Sure.
You mentioned Rutgers having the 22nd top recruiting class in the country. Is that
Ahead of Ole Miss and
be
Florida.
enough for them to compete?
It'll be enough. Well, ultimately, it depends on how it pans out. They're not going to stay at 22. They could go up. They could go down. But it's a positive sign for Rutgers, given their history. Historically, they've not been a good team. They've not gotten top 25 recruiting classes. The fact that they are now, and the fact that currently they're ahead of teams like Ole Miss and Florida, means that they are attracting talent. I would also say this. The NIL and the transfer portal has changed things. Okay, so sometimes you would expect that most players would want to go to the top schools, which will funnel them into the NFL. But now money is part of the equation. So if Rutgers can outbid, say, Georgia, and say we'll give you $1 million instead of $750,000, they may attract players that might not otherwise go there. The second thing I would say is the transfer portal. Rutgers is the type of school that might get former 4-star and 5-star recruits that didn't start at, say, an Alabama or Georgia. And so when you combine those two with the current status of the recruiting class, I think that there's a strong chance that Rutgers will continue to be competitive. Whether they go over the hump and start competing with the Georgias and the Alabamas remains to be seen. I don't think they're there yet.
Yeah, I don't think that all the help's going to really be that much, even if they do get that top 25. I think they're going to have to win a lot of games this year to even get those recruits to come in.
Well, I appreciate the skepticism. We want everyone on this show to express their opinions honestly, and you might be right. We'll see going forward, but stay tuned for future shows where we're going to talk about the results of the upcoming games, which are going to be against some really good teams.
All right.
All right. Anything else?
That'll do it.
All right. Thanks so much for being on the show, Joe. We appreciate it.
Of course.
Okay. Well, first show, 2 callers, 2 good callers. We appreciate them being on the show and appreciate their good comments. So let's go back to the topic we were going to talk about, outlook for Rutgers going forward. Well, number one, it all starts with head coach Greg Schiano. Greg Schiano is, in his own words, the perfect fit for Rutgers, and this is Schiano's last stop in college football, as he recently stated in an interview. But like I said, it's his second stint at Rutgers. Let's talk about his first stint from 2001 to 2011. 2001, he was 2-9. Not good. 2002, even worse, 1-11. 2003, 5-7. 2004, 4-7. But then in 2005, he's 7-5 with a loss in the Insight Bowl. 2006, he's 11-2 with a victory over Texas. 2007, 8-5 with a win in the International Bowl. 2008, 8-5 with a win in the PapaJohns.com Bowl. I don't know why they named them. I don't know why they call them that, but that's they were second and won in the Papa John's Bowl. 2009, 9-4. 2010, 4-8. 2011, 9-4. So you see, with Schiano in the fifth year of the program, there was a major turnaround, starting with 7-5, 11-2, 8-5, 8-5, 9-4, with victories over top teams, including Texas. Now, after Schiano left, we unfortunately were greeted with the Chris Ash era. Yes, the Chris Ash era, where Chris Ash from 2016 to 2019 went respectively 2-10, 4-8, 1-11, and 2-10, returning Rutgers to where it had traditionally been, the bottom of its conference. Now, 2020, we have Greg Schiano back for his second stint at Rutgers. And what do we see? 2020, 3-6. 2021, 5-8. 2022, 4-8. 2023, 7-6. And now in his fifth year, he's 4-1 with victories over Virginia Tech and Washington and a narrow loss to Nebraska. So we see a similar pattern. In the fifth year, in each of his stints, there has been a major turnaround. And there's several characteristics, there's several factors that are engineering that turnaround. Rutgers has had more wins over ranked teams. Number 12 ranked rushing defense in the country. Number 22 ranked recruiting class. And Schiano is an old school tough coach and has developed a very tough defense, and Rutgers is dedicating resources to improve the program. When you combine all that with the transfer portal and NIL, the future for Rutgers may look bright, as it did in Schiano's first stint. And let's also look at the upward trajectory that Rutgers has gone on over the past 2 years. So in the 2023 season, okay, Rutgers loses to Ohio State 35-16. But Rutgers is up 9-7 at the half. I mistakenly said they were behind 14-7. I was referring to Michigan. I'll correct that. So they only lose 35-16, and they're up 9-7 at the half on the Buckeyes last year. They play Michigan in Ann Arbor. They are down only 14-7 at the half. This is to the eventual national champions who defeated Washington and, of course, Alabama in that great Rose Bowl game. They lost to Wisconsin by 11. They lost to a very good Penn State team by 21. But they beat Virginia Tech 35-16. They beat Michigan State. They beat Indiana. And for all of you Indiana fans out there who are gushing over Indiana's head coach and Indiana's newfound success, I will tell you that the likelihood of Indiana maintaining this record, in my opinion, is not good. But we shall see. They also, in 2023, defeated the Miami Hurricanes in the Pinstripe Bowl 31-24. So some pretty good wins there. And now in the 2024 season, you have the 26-23 win over Virginia Tech, the 21-18 victory over Washington, and really a loss that should have never happened. But I think when it comes to Rutgers football, what you have to say is this. Greg Schiano is the man for the job. Greg Schiano is a great coach. He is a great man. He is a great mentor. And he is the reason that Rutgers ascended in his first stint from 2001 to 2011, starting in the 5th year, and the reason they're ascending yet again in his second stint, starting in the 5th year. So, Coach Schiano, all the credit goes to you. You're a fine coach, one of the best in the country, and we love it if you come on the show for a few minutes to talk to us about Rutgers and the season. Now, we've got some upcoming games for Rutgers, and I'm going to tell you that the most important game is this Saturday against the Badgers of Wisconsin. At home in Piscataway. This is a must-win for Rutgers, okay? Wisconsin is going to try to run the ball on Rutgers. But Rutgers has the number 12th ranked rushing defense in the country. And they say styles make fights. Well, they match up well with the Badgers. But they have to win this game because they've got some difficult games coming up. I would predict that because of Rutgers' defense, because it's at home, and because the Badgers have been so inconsistent, up 21-10 over USC in the first half, only to lose 38-21 and get blown out in the second half. They're inconsistent. They do not have an elite receiving core. And Luke Fickell is trying to transform that offense into something that traditionally is not in Wisconsin's DNA, which is a run-first offense and a very physical offensive line and defense. So I'm going to predict a win for Rutgers on Saturday in a close one. Then they play the Bruins of UCLA. And the Bruins, unfortunately, not good this year. Okay, 27-11 was their last loss to Penn State. Just don't seem to have the talent this year. And I predict a Rutgers win. They are taking them to 6-1. And then we have to go. Then Rutgers has the University of Southern California, the USC Trojans, away at the LA Coliseum, where they will face Miller Moss, Zachariah Branch, and an opportunistic USC defense that has had some struggles both on the defensive and offensive lines. This one is going to be close, but I see a game that is somewhat similar to Nebraska. I think Rutgers is probably going to turn the ball over a couple of times. I don't think the offense is going to score enough points to win that game. And I think USC, with its back against the wall with 2 losses and still eyeing a playoff spot, is going to win that game by 2 touchdowns or more. So that takes Rutgers to 6-2 on the season. And then we have Minnesota home, and who knows what the Golden Gophers are or what they will become, because they just defeated a good USC team, and they were fairly close against Michigan in a 27-24 loss. But I'm going to give Rutgers the nod there in a close win. Then they're going to go to Maryland away. I don't have much to say about Maryland this year. Not a very good team. I think Rutgers wins that game, and they go to 7-2. Then they have the Illini, University of Illinois at home. I think that's a victory. Then they have Michigan State away. I think that's a victory. Michigan State really did not look very good against Ohio State, although they moved the ball at times. But again, I think that 12th-ranked Rutgers rushing defense is going to shut down Michigan State. Then we're possibly looking at a 9-2 season and possibly, dare I say, consideration for a playoff berth. But that remains to be seen. But when we're looking at the outlook for Rutgers football, the outlook is good. And the outlook for the show is really good because we have a third caller coming in here. We have, let's see, Mac. I'm going to welcome you to the show. Thanks so much for calling in.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you calling into the first Rutgers show. So what's on your mind?
Well, we're talking about football in the northeast of the country. I wanted to bring the attention maybe to a team that I don't think is getting enough recognition, and that would be the Harvard Crimson, which I think is the greatest team, to ever play the sport. My dad actually played on the Crimson back in '81 as a center, so it's really close to my heart. I think they've done really good this year. They're 2-1 with beating Stetson and New Hampshire, only losing to Brown by about 3 points. I think they've come in really strong under their new head coach. I think Tim Murphy was awesome. I've met him multiple times. He's a great guy. There's a signed football of his sitting on the mantle at our house. But I'm very happy with the way they're performing. I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on Ivy League football.
Okay. Thank you for that comment. So Harvard, yes, Harvard's an excellent academic school, certainly one of the best academic schools in the country. Very high admission standards, SAT, ACT, GPA, of course. I haven't given a great deal of thought to Ivy League football, except to say that there have been some players from Ivy League that have gone on to the NFL. So it's certainly not a league that we should just disregard or disrespect. And of course, the Harvard-Yale game every year is a great tradition. So I guess my opinion of Harvard football would be, for the league that they're in and for the talent that they have, they're certainly a respectable team. And given that there have been players from time to time that have gone to the NFL, I think they're respectable. Do I think they're comparable to, the ranked teams? No, but I think within their little category, yeah, they're a respectable team. Although, I'm from New Jersey, and when you talk about Harvard, you're mentioning, that's in Massachusetts where there's a lot of Red Sox fans, but that's for a different show.
Mm-hmm. So then, to go back to your focus, to talk about Rutgers. Sure, they're good this year, but what if that's only because of their defense? What's going to happen next year? Are they just going to become the joke of the Big Ten again? Like, do you see longevity in their program?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Rutgers is going to lose some players on defense this year. They do have some veterans on defense. They also have one of the nation's best running backs in Kyle Monangai, who's graduating. He's only 5'9", but he's very elusive. So they are going to lose some players. So that brings me to, well, how's their recruiting? And their recruiting so far, like I said before, they're ranked number 22 in the country at the moment, ahead of Ole Miss and ahead of Florida. And they've got so far 2 4-stars, a majority of 3 stars. So certainly some development is going to be necessary. But they are recruiting in New Jersey. And New Jersey has some really, really really good high school football programs. Bergen Catholic, where I went to high school actually and graduated in 1993. Don Bosco Prep, DePaul Catholic. So there's a local recruiting base that's very strong. Plus with the NIL and the portal, I think that they will continue to be competitive. Now, will they take a step back next year? Possibly. Michigan's taken a step back this year, and understandably so, because they had such a veteran team last year. But they're still good. So I think Rutgers will continue to be good, but there will have to be some rebuilding.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that answer. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Thanks so much for calling in. We appreciate it. Call back in again.
I will. Thank you.
And we have Jackson Johnson from the Alabama Voice of College Football show. Jackson, thanks so much for calling in. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. Just want to give out a congratulations on the first ever episode of Rutgers Scarlet Knights 1 on Rutgers at the Voice of College Football, and just want to see how you doing, man.
I'm doing great. Really enjoying the show. Happy to have some callers and appreciate you, coming in. Excited for this show to really take off and hopefully raise some attention to Rutgers football.
Well, I mean, it is the birthplace of college football, so it should get a lot of attention.
I hope so. They've got a great coach, and as a New Jersey native, there's nothing more I'd like to see than people start rooting for Rutgers. And if Rutgers strings together a few more victories, I think the nation might start paying attention.
Well, the schedule looks a little bit easier compared to past years because there's no Ohio State, no Michigan, no Penn State, not even a shred of Oregon. That's the funny part there.
I think I think they were fortunate this year to avoid Oregon, to avoid Penn State. And I mean, they've got Wisconsin at home, they've got UCLA at home, they've got Minnesota at home, and Illinois at home. If those games were away, I think Rutgers might lose 2 of the 4. But I think since they're home, they're probably going to win at least 3 of the 4, but maybe 4 of the 4. And if they do that with a 2-loss season, who knows where they could go?
Well, I've heard a lot about Ashton Genty all year so far, but it's like, where's Kyle Monogany? Like, did I get his last name right?
Yeah, Kyle Monongai.
Monongai, thank you.
He's an outstanding running back, but I think that they sometimes rely upon him too much to carry the offense. I think they need to have more balance on offense. And I'm not, I don't want to criticize Ethan Kaliakmanis, but his 2 interceptions against Nebraska were not good. He was not mobile in the pocket at all. And I think when you're relying on a running back to really carry the offense, you're eventually not going to have the kind of balance necessary to be successful. And I think we saw that against Nebraska. He wasn't even utilized that much. I mean, he had 19 carries for 78 yards, but Kyle Monongai is not going to be enough. They need to continue to recruit receivers, and ultimately I think they need to have a quarterback of a bit higher caliber.
Yeah, because, you can't rely on one player. We've seen that happen quite a lot in the NFL, and we've seen it quite a lot in college football as well. When you rely on one guy, it doesn't bowl well for anybody.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I think the problem is. And I would also say that, Alabama, it's starting to worry me a bit that Alabama is relying too much on Milroe and Ryan Williams when they need more balance. I mean, Ryan Williams, I don't know. I've never heard of a 17-year-old kid being amazing like this in his true freshman year. And Milroe has really improved substantially. You have to give him credit. But
yeah,
I haven't seen much from Kobe Prentice, Kendrick Law. C.J. Dupree has been pretty good, but they need more balance, I think, because I think they have the talent, unlike Rutgers, to win it all this year.
For sure. It was what happened last Saturday was surreal. It was something you do not see. Like it was something that happened for the first time since 1969 in Nashville, and for the first time since 1984.
Yeah, I was shocked at the defense, and I'm not sure if it's a problem with Kane Womack and the 4-2-5, or if it was just that the players were outplayed. But it seemed to me like Vanderbilt was out scheming us, and that the defense was kind of on its heels a bit. But I think if we play Vanderbilt 10 times, we probably win 8 or 9 of them. And maybe this was a good thing, because maybe it's a wake-up call to the team and to DeBoer. But I still think Alabama is in the hunt for the national championship.
Oh yeah, because I'll go as far as to say that it's kind of like 2017 Oklahoma Iowa State, because nobody had that game on their radar. Nobody was thinking about it except the fans, and some people were probably planning weddings on that day. They're like, okay, we don't have to watch that game. This will be a cinch against Iowa State. What happened?
Right.
They get upset by Iowa State in their own backyard.
Yeah, great point. Iowa State's one of those teams that has always perplexed me. They don't really have a great record, but they always are competitive enough to upset somebody. They went into Kinnick Stadium and beat Iowa this year. So they're certainly not a team to be taken for granted. And Vanderbilt kind of seems similar to Iowa State, and they showed that on Saturday for sure.
Well, and I saw something on X today where the Big 12 road record for Iowa State from 1998-2015 was 15-67, and under Matt Campbell is 27-30. So all those people that were whining and crying about Matt Campbell last year, they're nowhere to be found now.
No, absolutely. That's an incredible improvement. So What do you think? Do you think that there's any teams this year that we're not talking about that could come out of nowhere and compete for the national title?
That's a very good question. I think honestly, this year so far, it feels kind of like 2007 2.0 because of
Yeah.
stuff that you do not see. You see number one losing for the past few weeks. In '07, you rarely see Alabama losing to a group of 5 team, yet they did that year. You don't ever see Alabama losing to Vandy, yet you do this year. So that
Yeah.
kind of feels like there's a sign of things to come, that upsets are really coming. So
Yeah.
oh yeah.
I agree. It doesn't make any sense to me. Well, it's just so chaotic. I mean, you have Michigan beating Minnesota, Minnesota beating USC, Alabama beating Georgia, Vanderbilt beating Alabama. So I think it's going to be pretty chaotic. But I think that the team that's probably in the best position right now is probably Alabama because of their schedule. I was initially concerned about Tennessee, but then Tennessee loses to Arkansas. I was concerned about Oklahoma, but they don't seem to have an offense. And I was concerned about LSU, but they don't seem to have much of a defense. And I think they're all winnable games. And even if we win 2 of the 3 of them, we're still only a 2-loss team. And I'm just not as sold on Georgia as I initially was. So if I had to pick right now, I would say the favorite to win the national title is Alabama.
Ooh.
Now,
For
people
me,
talk Texas. I know Texas. I know Oregon, Ohio State. Maybe I'll revise that and say I would say Ohio State is probably the favorite, but Alabama, I think, is a close second. And I'm not sold on Texas yet, and most people probably think I'm crazy, but I got to see how good Texas defense is. And I think Texas defense, especially in the secondary, is a bit vulnerable. And I guess I'm going to have a different opinion when they play Georgia, and that'll clarify things. But right now, I think Alabama, with their talent and with Jalen Milroe at quarterback, probably number 2. I think Ohio State right now is the most likely candidate, but we'll see.
well, they got to get through Oklahoma first. I mean, I know that Oklahoma has been looking pretty sloppy these past few weeks, but the Red River rivalry, that's one of those rivalry games where you got to take the records out. And also, the past 2 times that the game has been played at 2:30, it's not bolted well for Texas. We saw it in 2017, and we saw it
Yeah.
on October 2nd, 2010, that it did bolt well for Texas that week as well.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, the Red River, the rivalry is so unpredictable. I mean, Texas goes in and beats Alabama 34-24, and they lose to Oklahoma. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Bedlam when Oklahoma played Oklahoma State. You never know what's going to happen. So I'm curious what's going to happen this Saturday, and especially, Ohio State, Oregon. That's going to also give a lot of kind of clarification to who's really good and who's, maybe not in that top elite tier of 3 or 4 teams.
That's true. And also, I keep thinking about Ole Miss, LSU. Like, I'll be flipping between Ohio State, Oregon, Ole Miss, LSU. And,
Yeah.
Penn State, USC is going to be a good one because this is USC's moment where they have to really show they're still alive for playoff contention. Because, I mean, it's crazy, right? 4-2, you're still in playoff contention. Well, you are in the SEC and Big Ten.
That's one of the great things about the 12-team playoff. I think, USC came in with a lot of expectations this year with D'Anton Lynn as the defensive coordinator, but that loss to Minnesota really hurt them because when I look at their schedule, they're going to have to face Penn State. They're going to have to face Nebraska. They're going to have to face Rutgers at some point, and then they're going to have to go across the country again at Maryland. I don't necessarily see them winning all those games, and Miller Moss has been pretty inconsistent. But again, we'll know more on Saturday. I think Penn State probably wins that game, but like you said, it's USC's moment. Their backs are against the wall. If they don't win that, then the season isn't looking good for them. So who knows what's going to happen there?
True. I mean, USC Penn State feels a lot similar to USC Minnesota, especially for how it was for Minnesota last week. But I just got to thinking about Rutgers, Wisconsin. How are you feel about this game so far?
Rutgers, Wisconsin, I think is going to be extremely tight, but I think that the style of football that Rutgers plays matches up well with Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin's going to try to run the ball. Now, I know Luke Fickell has wanted to kind of change the DNA of Wisconsin, but I don't think it's gone very well. I think they're going to try to run it on USC. And I think USC's 12th ranked, Rutgers 12th ranked rushing defense is going to contain them. So to beat Rutgers, Wisconsin's going to have to throw the ball. And I'm not so sure that they're going to be able to do that consistently and successfully enough to win. And because it's at home in New Jersey, I think Rutgers is going to win by something along the lines of a 23-17 score.
Ooh, that's a good one. And plus, Wisconsin's not exactly going to be going up against Purdue this week.
Yeah, Purdue. I don't know. Purdue is just so bad. Ugh. But I mean, on the other hand, Wisconsin was up 21-10 on USC at the half. So it's hard to tell with these teams because for one half they're good, for another half, I mean, Georgia first half after the first quarter they're down 28-0, but in the second half they torch Alabama, and it's just so chaotic and it's hard to predict. But I think Rutgers probably wins. Although I would put it kind of like 52% chance of winning.
Yeah, I mean that game is basically anyone's ball game right there.
Yeah, it's going to be a great game. It's going to be a great day for college football. In fact, I was supposed to fly back to New Jersey on Saturday for a week. I changed my flight to Sunday because the games are just so good, and I don't want to miss them. So great day on Saturday.
Well, and your X handle is SC Trojans 97, right?
That's it. Yeah, on X. Yep.
There we go.
SC Trojans 97.
Yep. There we go. Tell your friends, your family, and the cashiers at Publix about Adam Lamparello on X, as you can give him a follow on SC Trojans 97, and you can also give him a follow on Instagram at Adam Lamparello. There's no underscore, just Adam Lamparello, as he gives some magnificent takes in all college football. Stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss his takes.
Thanks so much, Jackson. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Have a great night. Okay. Great call from Jackson. Jackson hosts Alabama at the Voice of College Football. Strongly encourage you to check that out because he's a great analyst and they always have great shows. So we've talked about the Nebraska game, the outlook for Rutgers this season looks positive. What about the recruiting? So right now they've got the number 22nd ranked recruiting class in the country. Like I've said, ahead of Ole Miss and Florida at this point. They already have 5 4-stars that are committed to Rutgers, including wide receiver Michael Thomas III from Donovan Catholic, and Talibi Kaba from Hillside, New Jersey. They've got 24 3-stars, and a lot of people, place a tremendous amount of value in these star designations, but often you will see that 3-stars with a good program that is focused on development, and you see that at places like Iowa, turn into 4 5-star players. So they've got a solid base of recruiting already, and New Jersey has a lot of high school football powerhouses. Bergen Catholic High School, where I went to high school and graduated 31 years ago, Bergen Catholic currently ranked 22nd in the nation and recently had a fairly close game against powerhouse IMG, losing, I believe, 27-10 at IMG, although the game is closer than the score would indicate. Don Bosco High School, another excellent high school that produced players like Mike Teal and DePaul Catholic. So they've got a solid base to recruit from New Jersey. But again, with the NIL and the transfer portal, the future looks quite bright for their recruiting, and you see that because of who they've recruited thus far, with 24 3-stars and 5 4-stars, and you see it with their current ranking of 22. So when we talk about the trajectory of Rutgers, combine that with the recruiting, Greg Schiano's tenure at Rutgers looks like it will continue to be successful, as it was in the 5th year of his first stint on forward, and now in his 5th year, looking bright, and on forward, it will be successful. Final thing to talk about tonight is the overview of the Big Ten and college football after a few chaotic weeks of football. Like we've discussed, Alabama defeats Georgia, is up 30-7 at the half. Then Georgia comes around, goes ahead 34-33 with 439 yards of passing by Carson Beck, torching their secondary. Nonetheless, on a late play with 2 minutes left, pass from Milroe to Ryan Williams, Alabama secures the victory. Then they go and they lose 40-35 to a Vanderbilt team in a stadium in Nashville that had a majority of Alabama fans. Clearly, they didn't look prepared. Clearly, the defense struggled and was out-schemed by Vanderbilt. And you're seeing this all over college football, okay? Michigan defeats USC. Then Michigan loses to Washington. What's going on here? Well, look, Michigan was a veteran team last year that deserved the national championship that they won, but they lost a lot of players, and they have a QB problem with Davis Warren, Alex Orji, and Jack Tuttle. But they're still good. But you're seeing teams having some great victories, but then having some terrible defeats. You see Ole Miss, okay? Ole Miss losing to Kentucky and then going out and really dominating South Carolina. You see Clemson getting blown out against Georgia, but really has come back very, very strong. So, you see USC defeating LSU, but then losing to Minnesota. So there's a lot of unpredictability in college football at this moment, and I think that's a reflection of the increased parity in college football that has resulted, and that will continue to result from NIL and the transfer portal. So ultimately, it's really not clear who the best teams are. But when you look at, there are some things you can kind of glean from the first few weeks. And I would say this. There is a small group of elite teams that are going to compete for the national championship. And then there's the gray area of over almost two dozen teams that are good, but not in that elite category. And I would say at this point in the season, it looks like Ohio State, with that outstanding defense and Will Howard playing good football, is probably the number one team in the country. Number 2, Alabama. And I know this is probably a very unpopular take, but Alabama has the talent. And Alabama has an incredibly dynamic quarterback in Jalen Milroe, a generational receiver in Ryan Williams, and a defense that is much better than it showed. Texas is elite. Texas has, of course, an outstanding quarterback and wide receiving core. The issue is their defense elite enough to win the national championship? Probably. But let's see them get tested first before I put them in the number 2 or number 1 spot. And the last team I think that is contending at this point, and it really is difficult to decide between Georgia or Oregon. So I'm going to go to 5 teams, and I'm going to say Georgia and Oregon are right now the Elite 5. And Will that change? Well, possibly, because Georgia has to go at Texas. Alabama has to go at LSU, at Oklahoma, at Tennessee. And I would have included Tennessee in that top 5. But the reason I didn't include them in the top 5 is because, first, their offense didn't look dominant against Oklahoma, and they certainly did not look dominant against Arkansas. And they have a true freshman quarterback. So Tennessee is going to be slightly outside of that top 5. So that, I think, is going to be ultimately – those 5 teams, I think, ultimately are going to compete for the national title. Now, will there be some more chaos? Sure. But I think the chaos is going to be spread across the board so that there's not going to be just a few teams that suffer 2, maybe even 3 losses. But I do think that those teams will be the teams that compete for the national title. And although this is a conversation for a different show, I think that the 12-team playoff is a mistake. Because if you look at the elite teams in this country right now, and if you look at the elite teams in the country over the last 30, 40 years, there's only really been about 4 or 5, maybe 6, that we could say legitimately had a chance to win the national title. Okay? I don't think anybody has ever said that the 11th or 12th ranked team in the country should have a chance at winning the national championship or was good enough to do so. Yet here we are, having the 11th and 12th ranked team, and for that matter, the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th ranked teams going into a playoff, which I think is not going to be productive because they simply are not in the category of those 5 or 6 teams. And I think each year the focus should be on identifying who are the teams that really are in that elite category. Maybe 1 year it's 5 teams, maybe 2 years it's 6 teams, but surely it's never going to be 12 teams. And I'll give you an example of last year. There was this controversy. Should Alabama be number 4 or should Florida State be number 4? Or what about Georgia and Ohio State? Should they have been in the top 4? Well, my answer to that question is we shouldn't even have to ask it. We should just include all of those teams in a playoff because those teams certainly were in that elite category. So instead of having Washington, Texas, Alabama, and Michigan, you have Washington, Texas, Alabama, Michigan, Florida State, Ohio State, and Georgia. And then you capture the teams that are in that elite category that are going to contend for the national championship. And maybe it'll change from 1 year to another. Maybe another year it'll be 4 teams. Maybe another year 6 teams. But each year is different, and each year brings with it nuances that require you to adjust your system to reflect that. Otherwise, you get a playoff system like we have now, where every year we're going to have teams that have no business competing for the national championship in a playoff that really is ultimately going to be decided between the elite teams that we would have otherwise put in if we had a different playoff system while leaving out those who would not compete. So, the Nebraska game for Rutgers, a loss that they should have had, but the outlook, given Greg Schiano's tenure, first and second tenure, looks good. And given the schedule, it looks good for Rutgers this year. And given the recruiting, the future looks bright too. And in a world of college football that has become chaotic, Rutgers just might be the team that continues to ascend. And my answer to the question I raised at the beginning of the show, will they contend for the Big Ten championship? Not this year, but they will soon. And with that, that concludes the first episode of Rutgers at the Voice of College Football. If you enjoyed the show, hit the like and subscribe button. And just to, as a reminder, we will be broadcasting every Monday at 7 p.m., going over the previous week's games, recruiting, and the outlook for Rutgers football. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and have a great evening. We'll see you on Monday.